There has been a lot going on with COVID-19, and you wouldn't know it if you're looking at the front pages of a lot of newspapers because, well, Afghanistan is a much more prime story to cover, and there isn't a lot that people are particularly interested in when it comes to COVID-19 in a lot of ways because, well, COVID-19 has been going on for 18 months at this point. Most people are completely tired of it, but that has not prevented for there to be a number of fairly major developments over the past few weeks. And one of the most major ones, or at least one that is, I think, indicative of what is happening currently with the pandemic, or endemic disease, as it might be, is Governor Abbott's testing positive for COVID-19, despite not only being fully vaccinated, but not having any symptoms at all. And the interesting thing about this, in particular, is that no one's asking the right questions. Cool, he tested positive for COVID-19, but why was he testing for COVID-19 in the first place when he, one, is fully vaccinated and thus should be completely protected, 95% effectiveness, according to the clinical trials which have occurred? And on top of that, why is he testing when he doesn't have symptoms? He still doesn't have symptoms, at least at the time of this recording. That might change in the future. But why would you be testing for something that you don't have any symptoms for? And why would you be testing for diseases at all if you're not sick? And this is one of the greatest maladies of the entire COVID-19 pandemic, but especially right now, because it is not so much that COVID-19 is a pandemic which is causing massive amounts of deaths and destruction across the world, with many people being sick for weeks and weeks on end with horrible symptoms, more than it is a test-demic, where we are constantly bumping up the numbers not through actual greater infection rates, but instead through testing many people who have no business being tested for COVID-19 at all. This is a large part of the reason that fully vaccinated people are slowly rising in percentages of people who have COVID-19, not only because of a lowering effectiveness rate of the vaccine, which I'll get to later, but also because the vaccinated are also the most paranoid about the pandemic, COVID-19 in general, and so they're the most likely to get a test even if they don't really have a reason to get tested. You see, I had COVID-19 not 3 weeks ago, but I don't know that because I got tested, because I didn't. I never needed to, because I never needed to go to the doctor. It was never that bad. The worst part about it was that it was persistent, but I do know that it was COVID-19, or at least in all likelihood it wasn't. By the way, in all likelihood the Delta variant, because of my particular symptoms. But I know that because people around me got tested. And people around me got tested, even when many of the people in my family who also got it had less symptoms than I did. It's kind of insane to see just how paranoid people are getting, or have been, about this disease. And it's not as though this is completely society-wide, because the panic of COVID-19 has gone down broadly and in the public consciousness. And this is in no small part due to the fact that experts have been consistently wrong about their particular claims. And this is no better exemplified, I think, to me, at least most recently. I have so many examples I could have picked from over the past year, but I wanted to choose something a bit recent, you see. Then the example of the NIH director, this is a Francis something or other, I forget his last name at the moment, admitting to a press guy, Hugh Hewitt. I don't know who really either of these people are, but I like this exchange. I think it's very indicative of what's going on, where they are talking about school mask mandates. And the NIH director admits in this exchange that he doesn't actually have any data to suggest that masking in schools helps at all, including either the infections for children or in the infectious rates for adults and deaths in those cases. This is all, of course, couched in the fact, oh, well, no, it's all about safety and whatnot. And yeah, I don't have that data, but it doesn't matter. It's about saving lives. even in the lack of data. And this is quite the funny exchange. I really do suggest you go check it out. Link in the description, archived, as I always do, along with every other source I've been using for this video and will continue to use. And in this case, I think this really shows just how wrong many of the experts have been throughout the pandemic. Because really, at this point, the idea of someone being a misinformation monger is essentially, it can be replaced by they're right the first time, and about 90% of the time you're going to end up being having a more accurate perception of what's going on. I mean, whether it be human-to-human transmission back in January and February of 2020, whether it be the travel restrictions that Trump was doing, whether it be going forward masks, whether it be vaccinations, whether that could get done within the year, whether it be all sorts of things, whether it be that therapeutics exist for this disease at all of these things end up coming back to bite the so-called experts. And it ends up being that the people who are spreading misinformation are much closer to the mark than the experts ever were. Take, for example, the mask position, which I did a number of videos on back when all of this was more coming up. You have the initial idea of, well, there's a Germany study that shows that mask mandates were 75% effective at preventing COVID-19, whereas I was very easily able to point out that in this case, they were actually using a model which assumed that would happen. So it's not surprising that their model, which is all a bunch of fake data, they run through the real data, and then they get fake data out, ended up showing that it would be 75% effective. That was the core assumption of the study. It's not a conclusion. Then you later go on to see the real data analysis, which shows from the CDC that it was a 1% difference at best, and they really stretched to try and make it seem like it was statistically significant, when really its statistical significance was arguable at best. And that means I am much closer to Mark with my it's either negligible or it does nothing at all, in comparison to the 75% being claimed by many of the pro-maskers, especially when considering that many of these people are also suggesting, well, double masking and all that sort of stuff. And this continues on into the vaccine, which has come up with a number of problems, first of which I would be utterly aghast to not suggest, to show vaccine passports, which were once a conspiracy theory that could only be suggested by the greatest of misinformation mongers, have now come to full fruition, where now they are being openly promoted in mainstream newspapers as the reason we have nice things. And the funny thing about this particular article is that it shows examples of either things which were used as justification for eugenics, or utterly irrelevant things which are just foreign policy measures, which are completely different from suggesting that vaccine mandates should be done through all of society. If you want to walk outside, you need to show your papers. That's completely different from having to show your papers to go out of the country. It's a very surprising thing, right? But the funniest thing about vaccines, especially considering their lack of testing, is not necessarily a problem of safety, at least not in my mind. It's actually a problem of efficacy, because these vaccines are not that effective. It's not the polio vaccine, it's not the smallpox vaccine. This vaccine doesn't prevent infection, doesn't prevent you from spreading it, doesn't prevent you from getting taking a severe reaction to disease, or even prevent you from dying from this disease. All of these four things have happened to people who are fully vaccinated. The first example of which should be Governor Abbott himself. Despite the fact that he's not symptomatic, he's still got it, and he's probably still spreading it if we're to assume that asymptomatic spread is a huge deal, which it really isn't, guys. And this is a central malady, because it's not just that the vaccine, it has some ineffectiveness some places. Oh, it's a 5% deficit. Sometimes it's not effective. Because the effectiveness of the vaccine, as we've seen over the past, 6 months, which, by the way, I believe now actually exceeds the trial period that they did before getting their emergency approval. It's shown that the vaccines have very quick degenerating effects. They very quickly go from being super effective, if even that, to being not so effective. Within 6 months, you end up getting similar data to what has happened in the UK and Israel, where cases are going up, especially among the vaccinated. And at this point, you're getting suggestions from the Biden and Harris administration that they're going to start suggesting booster shots in September and probably mandating those as well. And so, what you come to at the end of all of this is that COVID-19 is endemic. It's like every other respiratory illness, and that means it spreads fast, mutates fast, and will never go away entirely. Yes, we may have an effective vaccine to a certain extent, a seasonally effective vaccine, much like the flu vaccine before it. But the flu vaccine, isn't mandated in a whole lot of places because flu isn't all that dangerous of a disease, and the flu vaccine isn't all that effective in the first place. It's only it varies from either 10% to 60% effectiveness, but that's not all that much, and a similar thing may end up happening with COVID-19. In fact, it's looking like it's going in that exact direction. And it's also worth it to mention at this point that the COVID-19 vaccines have not gone through the full trial period. Not even close. For the FDA, the average time it takes to actually institute a vaccine and actually approve it is 12 years. These things haven't even existed in the thoughts, as an idea, in the minds of the people developing it, for a sixth as long as that. Not to mention how long it's been had trials to suggest that an emergency approved vaccine, which has not been tested for either efficacy or safety, really. I mean, it has certain levels of short-term efficacy and short-term safety, though, of course, there are problems, but there's complications in almost every vaccine. That can't be mandated. I'm sorry, it just can't. Because it's so far below the level of the evidentiary standard that we normally suggest needs to be had for any sort of medical mandate, that it simply doesn't even get to the bar. Never mind clearing it. And that's the sort of thing we're up against, really. These vaccines are just kind of a mess. And it's not as though I'm completely against people getting it. Once again, to completely reiterate my entire position, it's an individual choice. I'm totally fine with you taking experimental drugs if you think it has a benefit to you. If you're an old person who's much more likely to die from this disease than, say, I am, especially after I just got it, and am probably not going to be reinfected with it for a while, go ahead. That's exactly what you should do. Because that's the risk assessment. If you're 81, the vaccine isn't as much of a risk to you as COVID-19 itself. But for me, well, the vaccine doesn't have all that much benefit, and COVID-19 isn't all that big a deal. So that's where we're at. It's an individual choice. And that should be the reasonable position, but no one wants to accept this. Despite the fact that even the mainstream media is quietly accepting that this virus is fundamentally endemic, with an Atlantic article quietly coming out admitting all of that. That, well, it's like every other disease, every other respiratory illness. We're not going to really be able to get rid of it because it's going to keep mutating, it's going to keep coming back, and vaccines aren't completely effective against it anyway because that's how respiratory illnesses work. And that's about all. That's all she wrote. And that's all I wrote for this video. Well, I didn't write anything for this video. I just rant. But if you enjoyed that rant, do in fact subscribe down below. I'm still trying to get back into the groove, so I apologize for the late upload. Though, if it ends up working out, I might end up doing these in the afternoon anyway. Though, if you also enjoyed it, do check me out in other places, all right? Because I'm not just on mainstream tech. I'm also on BitChute. I'm on Odyssey. I'm on Rumble. I'm on Brighteon. And if you want to check me out and see when I occasionally put my thoughts up, if I ever even remember to do that, I also have a Minds and Gab, and I might get a Getter eventually. I don't know. I'm just being lazy about that. And that's all. And I'm gonna head out. I'm KelKidman. This has been Breaking on the Daily, and I'm out.